Broken Britain, amazing China. Everything seems to be miserable and broken in the UK these days, and everything seems fine and dandy in China. At least that's what some people say on the internet. But how real is this narrative? Today I would like to talk about certain aspects of life in both the UK and China, and you can judge for yourself. As a matter of fact, I'm in China right now. I grew up in the UK. I was there between 1974 and 1997. After 1997, I spent most of my life in Hong Kong, but I also spent a substantial amount of time in Thailand and Vietnam. In the UK and the US, Australia and Canada, there is a cost of living crisis. And a lot of people are finding that their standard of living has been deteriorating or remained stagnant over the past few years. And I think it's because of this reason. They go online and they see videos of China. They see the latest infrastructure in China, in particular the high-speed rail. And then they come to the conclusion that China is the ascending power and the West is deteriorating. Now, when I lived in the UK 30 years ago, the London Underground was also dirty. The public transport was also inadequate, and a lot of the public toilets were dirty. But we didn't pay much attention. And that's because the economy was more stable 30 years ago. Costs were lower, and it was probably a lot easier to find a job back then. So we just ignored these negative aspects. The West is suffering from inflation, but in China, the Chinese are suffering the opposite problem. There is deflation in the economy. So deflation is defined as a year-on-year reduction in prices. That may sound good as a consumer, but in actual fact, if prices are falling, consumers will hold back from consumption because they think that prices will fall the next month. And if you are a company and you realize that your products are falling in price, you will then not give your employees a pay rise. Well, you may in fact give them the pay cut. And actually in China, if you had bought a property 10 years ago, then you will find that prices have fallen over the past 10 years. And therefore you have actually lost some of your wealth. So it's not all fine and dandy in China. China has the opposite problem of the West. So in the West there is inflation and a cost of living crisis, but in China there is deflation. And deflation is probably more dangerous than inflation. And if you look at the case of Japan, they've been through 30 years of deflation, and it's resulted in negative growth. Now, I want to talk about China's high-speed rail. So China's high-speed rail is the largest in the world. I wouldn't say it's the safest in the world. And I can say without a doubt that the rail system in China is far superior to the train system in America and the UK. So a lot of people come to the conclusion that everything is great in China. But let me tell you one thing. The high-speed rail in China is very expensive. It's more expensive than the plane. So let me give you an example. Right. So if you take the high-speed rail from Beijing to Shenzhen, the cheapest train will cost you 1,000 Hong Kong dollars, which is about 128 US dollars, right? Now, I looked at the flights. If you fly from Beijing to Shenzhen, it is roughly 3 hours and 15 minutes. Now, let's just remember that. 3 hours, 15 minutes, okay? This August, that's August of 2025, I will visit America. And I bought an air ticket from Los Angeles to New York. Now, from Los Angeles to New York, it's a 5.5 hour flight. And I paid $108 for 2 persons. That's $54 per person to fly for 5.5 hours, okay? So if you compare that to travel that distance, if you compare that with China, right? If you take the high-speed rail in China, even though it's great and efficient, if you travel from Beijing to Shenzhen, right, that the actual distance by plane is 3 hours 15 minutes, and it costs you $128 US. Now let's look at a similar flight in Europe. If you fly from London to Istanbul, flight time 3 hours 50 minutes, and that flight ticket will cost you 456 Hong Kong dollars. That is 59 US dollars, right? So what I'm saying is, even though the high-speed rail in China is great, it's really efficient, but the problem is it actually costs more than taking the plane. A lot of people praise China because China is a cashless society, and everywhere you go in China you need a mobile phone. But what if your mobile phone runs out of battery? What if you lose your mobile phone? Well, in that case, you probably can't go on the underground, or you can't buy something to drink. But more importantly, I think a lot of people in the West forget one thing. If you have British pounds or euros or US dollars, you can actually trade these for other assets in unlimited quantities, right? But you can't say the same thing about the Chinese currency. You cannot trade the RMB for US dollar cash in unlimited quantities. And besides, I think that in recent years, I think most of the world is going cashless, but I think it's slightly different. In China, cashless means you need your mobile phone, because most people here use Alipay. But outside China, cashless usually means Visa or MasterCard. And I personally prefer to use Visa card and MasterCard, because for one thing you get a 1% rebate on all your purchases. I don't know if you get a rebate on Alipay or not. But the second reason is that you can never, your MasterCard will never run out of battery. I mean, you may lose it, but you'll never run out of battery. So I think that credit cards are more convenient than a mobile phone when you want to pay for things. But that is just my opinion, right? There is one final point I would like to say about China, and that is you cannot buy real estate in China. You can buy a house, the actual structure, but you cannot buy the land. You can only borrow the land for 70 years. So basically in China you can't really buy a house, right? Let me conclude by giving you a recap of 5 key points which I've mentioned in this video. Number 1, the West is suffering from inflation, whereas China is suffering from deflation. They're both bad things. Deflation is probably worse. Number 2, yes, China's infrastructure is superior when you compare it to the UK, US, Australia and Canada. Yes, the London Underground is dirty. Yes, the public transport in the UK is inefficient. But I think that these are issues you would ignore if the economy was better. Number 3, China's high-speed rail is the longest in the world. It's not the safest in the world. It is quite impressive, but I would prefer to fly because the flights are actually cheaper. And even though America does not have a high-speed rail system, the flights are still cheaper. So it doesn't really matter whether or not America has it or not. Number 4, China is a cashless society, but the rest of the world is catching up, and I personally prefer to use MasterCard. And number 5, in China you cannot buy your own real estate, but you can buy real estate in Western countries. So, and I'd like to finish by talking about young Brits. If you live in Britain right now and you think that the cost of living is too much and you think that you're not saving any money, maybe you should consider moving to a cheaper country in Asia, or maybe go to South America. Anyway, thanks for watching.